Is the building of the third temple finished? If the answer is yes, then why does no one know? Does that also mean that Jesus has returned? Stay tuned to the unknown facts as we talk more about when the prophecy of Ezekiel on building the third temple. The Messianic era and the reconstruction of the Jewish temple are inextricably linked. It is critical to rebuild the temple because it will be the seat of the Messiah's reign from which he will rule the world. The reconstruction of the temple also indicates that Israel's enemies have been defeated and are no longer present in the land. People argue a lot about whether or not the Jewish third temple should be rebuilt. Here are some common arguments against it. First, Jesus' work on the way to personal salvation is done and doesn't need a physical temple. In fact, Christ made a physical temple unnecessary. Yes and no is my answer. True, Christianity doesn't need a physical temple, but Jesus did not make the Jewish temple any longer needed. The temple has never been for Christians or non-Jews, and it will never be for them. Even though Christians don't need a temple, that doesn't mean Jews don't. Ezekiel 40-48 makes it clear that the Jews will serve Christ in the temple during the millennium, not for their own salvation, but for the sake of the whole country. Also, the millennial temple will be used by the government, not just for religious reasons. Second, if the Jews rebuild the temple, it means they will go back to the system of sacrifices in the Mosaic Law. In the end, times, aren't people supposed to turn to Christ? Yes and yes, but it doesn't matter. Yes, all of Israel will be saved when the millennium comes. Yes, animal sacrifices will start up again in the temple that was rebuilt, but sacrificing animals has nothing to do with being saved or with following Christ. As a punishment, this means that the Jews will have to do religious services that the Gentiles won't have to do. It's got nothing to do with being saved. Third, how could the Jews rebuild the temple where Islamic buildings now stand when politics are unstable and there is a fight over who controls Jerusalem? So that's why there's going to be a war. The old fights aren't getting better, they're getting worse. The Jews want to fully practice their religion again so badly, and they are sick and tired of waiting. The countries around Israel want to get rid of the Jews and are sick of waiting. They are going to fight each other at some point, but sacrifices will start up again on the Temple Mount at some point, even if only for a short time, and Jerusalem will be attacked. Why should the third temple be rebuilt? There are 5 main reasons why the Jewish temple will be rebuilt in Jerusalem for the third time in the future. First is Ezekiel's prophecy. The fact that Ezekiel's vision of the temple of God has such precise measurements and details suggests that it is a real building and not just a spiritual or symbolic one. In the same way, measurements are given in long cubits, which is an old term for building or construction. If God only meant for Ezekiel's temple to be symbolic, spiritual, or heavenly, there would be no reason to give its exact measurements in terms of how people build things on earth. God never tries to trick people on purpose. Also, the idea that Ezekiel's temple is a vision of heaven is completely ruled out by Revelation 21:22, which says that there will be no temple in the New Jerusalem, which is heaven. I won't read a Bible verse in a way that makes it contradict another Bible verse, and you shouldn't either. If heaven won't have a temple, then Ezekiel can't tell us anything about a temple in heaven. In any case, Ezekiel's visions of the New Jerusalem don't fit at all with John's vision of the same place. The New Jerusalem will be on the new earth. It will be 1,500 miles square and the same height. There will be 12 gates in the city, each named for one of Israel's 12 tribes. However, no land will be given to each tribe. Revelation says that there can't be a temple, but in Ezekiel's visions there is one. Also, the city of Jerusalem is only 4,500 cubits square instead of 1,500 miles. Ezekiel foresaw that the land of Israel would be redivided among the tribes. The boundaries would be written in standard metes and bounds language, just like a property deed, and they would be based on real-world landmarks. Also, he saw a river flowing south through the Arabah and into the sea. Again, he used current landmarks which probably won't be there on the new earth. So how could Ezekiel's visions have anything to do with the new earth and the new Jerusalem, which is heaven? It is also true that no temple in Jerusalem has ever been the size that Ezekiel says it should be. Exact measurements of the walls, gates, circumferences, wall thicknesses, altar, chambers, buildings, etc. None of them match the size of the second temple. Also, Ezekiel 47:1-5 talks about a river that flows from the temple to the Dead Sea. This is something that has not happened yet. So this part of Ezekiel's vision also can't be about the second temple. Also, Ezekiel's description of how the land would be divided, with its holy district and tribal divisions, hasn't come close to happening yet. All of these things make sure that Ezekiel's vision of the temple will come true in the future, probably during the millennium. So the question is simple. If no temple in history matches Ezekiel's vision, and there won't be a temple in heaven, why did God give Ezekiel the vision if it wasn't a plan for a building that hasn't been built yet? Since God knows everything from the beginning of time to the end of time, He doesn't need to make guesses, plans for things that might not happen, or make plans that He will never use. If God made detailed plans for a temple that hasn't been built yet, it's because He plans to use those plans in the future. The second reason is the thing that brings desolation. The abomination of desolation is talked about in Daniel 9:27, 11:31, and 12:11. Both Matthew 24:15 and 2 Timothy 2:4 say the same thing. All of these texts are part of prophecies that mostly talk about the Antichrist in the future and not about events in the past. We've already talked about Daniel 9:27. The next section about the abomination of desolation will talk about the other texts. It should be read along with this section. The point is that there can't be a future abomination of desolation if there isn't a temple for it to happen in. Saying that there will never be another Jewish temple is the same as saying that there will never be another abomination of desolation. Look, the abomination of desolation must be either in the past or in the future. If not the future, then you can only choose the past. This means that all the prophecies about it have already come true, so the tribulation must have already happened, which is, of course, the view of the preterists. But Matthew 24:21 says that the tribulation will be like nothing has ever happened or ever will happen in the history of the world. Can it really be said that the troubled times of 70 AD will never be matched and that nothing will ever be worse? Or is Matthew 24:21 one of those verses that we shouldn't take literally because Jesus didn't mean for us to do that? Plus, Matthew 24:15 talks about the abomination of desolation from Daniel 9 as something that will happen after Jesus' first advent. Even though the destruction of the Second Temple happened 40 years later, the year 70 AD is not usually mentioned as the time when the abomination of desolation happened. People usually say that the event has already happened by pointing to Antiochus Epiphanes IV's destruction of the Second Temple in 167 BC. But Jesus could not have thought that was something that would happen in the future, so we have to think that Jesus' words have not yet come true. The third one is getting back to making daily sacrifices. The verses that have already been mentioned talk about the end of the Jewish daily sacrifices. That's great, but since Herod's temple was destroyed in 70 AD, there haven't been any daily Jewish sacrifices. So if they are to be stopped in the future, they must be first started again. Before sacrifices can start again, at least part of the temple must be rebuilt on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, or at least space for it must be cleared. Without a rebuilt Holy of Holies, or at least a clean space on the Temple Mount where the Holy of Holies would go, the Jews won't start sacrificing again. The Temple Mount is the only place where the Jewish Holy of Holies can be built. Trust me, there are Jews in Jerusalem right now who know exactly where the Holy of Holies must go on the Temple Mount. There's only one place where something like this could happen. That is, the Jews don't think they have the right to move the Holy of Holies from where it has always been. They have to put it back where God put it in the first time. Also, from a Christian point of view, it's not a question of whether or not the daily sacrifices should be brought back. The Jews will want to go back to them, and it will be them who build the third temple. The Jews have no reason to think that the Mosaic system of sacrifices has been done away with. For them, the Mosaic laws are still in place, and they are just waiting for a chance to bring back the system of sacrifices. They have good reason to think this because the Mosaic covenant says that it will last forever. The timeline of end times events says that there are two main time markers from which all end time events are measured: the second coming, and before that, the end of regular sacrifices on the Temple Mount. In the end times, this is a very important thing to happen. The most important time marker in the Bible is not the abomination of desolation, which comes 1290 days after the end of sacrifices. Instead, it is the end of sacrifices. The fourth one is the temple as the government center. Zechariah 6 makes it clear that when Jesus comes back, he will sit on the throne in the temple of God as both king and priest. But the point is that the future temple will serve a government purpose that has nothing to do with sacrifices or atonement. It's easy to get caught up in the talk about sacrifices and forget what the temple was for in the first place. Before the temple was built, the tabernacle was where God's glory, his very presence, lived. Supposedly, this went on until the Jerusalem temple was destroyed in the year 70 AD. Since then, the Shekinah glory, which is God's physical presence, has not been seen anywhere on earth, which makes perfect sense for the time when Christ is sitting at the right hand of the Father and not on earth. Ephesians 1:20 and 1 Peter 3:22. But when Jesus comes back to earth, all of this will change, and he will need a building to live in. So when Jesus died, the temple veil was torn all the way down. Once the Holy Spirit was sent, God's presence moved into every believer, and since then, believers have been God's homes. Even though the Holy Spirit will still do what he does after Christ comes back, there will be something extra that we don't have now. In other words, God's presence will once again be seen in the flesh, in the person of Jesus. This won't change or replace what the Holy Spirit is already doing. It will just add to what he does. So wherever Jesus lives after he comes back will have to be a temple. Since Jesus will be the personification of God's presence, God will live in his house. And by definition, God's house is a temple. During his first coming, people said that Jesus had nowhere to lay his head. Matthew 8:20, Luke 9:58. We have no reason to think that this will happen when Jesus comes back the second time. He will be king of the whole world at that time, and he will need a place to rule from. That place will be the temple in Jerusalem. Because Jesus will live there, it will once again be the house of God. There are already groups and organizations in Israel whose goal is to make sure that a third temple is built and sacrifices start up again. The Temple Institute and the Temple Mount Faithful are two of the most well-known of these officially, the Temple Mount and Eretz Yisrael Faithful movement. The third temple won't be finished until after Christ comes back, but that doesn't mean the Jews won't try to get it going sooner. When you look at the verses about the abomination of desolation and the beginning and end of sacrifices, it may appear that the Jews will try to rebuild the temple in the future. This work may or may not be done or be successful. It could be the rebuilding that Daniel 9:27 says will be stopped before it's done. Still, this unfinished work might clear the Temple Mount area, which might be enough to get the regular sacrifices going again. So that was all about the video. Hope you find it informative. Then do subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, and press the bell icon for more updates like this.